Hi and welcome to a cEDH gameplay with Kinnan, Najeela, Thrasios, Rograkh and Kambal. Now normally in these videos we're usually showcasing our hands and you usually hear players' own perspective. However, we had some audio troubles in recording, so this entire game is going to be narrated without any hands revealed throughout the match for you to see. Now the starting player is Kinnan, played by Pontus from Pingmeister Pongs, a basic typical Kinnan build where you're trying to get infinite mana with Tightspout Tyrant or Hullbreaker Horror, or more usually Basalt Monolith. Second in turn order is me, playing Najeela from Mimo. This is a 5-color build with various ways to gain infinite combat steps with Najeela the Blade Blossom, or basically win with Ad Nauseam into a Underworld Breach or just a clean Thrasios Consult victory. Then we have Snuske with us playing his Thrasios Rograkh build that is trying to, similar to Kinnan, generate infinite mana with something like Hullbreaker Horror or a Basalt Monolith inside the decklist, where he also has Kinnan inside the decklist. Last in turn order is Bradicus with his Kambal profiteering Azorius build. He's trying to win with things like Ad Nauseam together with Angel's Grace to draw his entire library, or something like Bloodsheath Ascension together with Mindcrank. And with that, let the game begin. Kinnan plays a land and casts Carpet of Flowers and passes the turn. Najeela plays Exotic Orchard into a Tinder Wall and passes the turn. Rograkh Thrasios plays Aridmisa to cast a Bird of Paradise and Rograkh, finding a Taiga and passing the turn. Kambal plays a fetch land, finding a scrub land, and then he passes the turn. Kinnan plays Minmamo, the land that can untap legendary permanents like the Wandering, and then uses that to cast Kinnan, his commander, and then he passes the turn. Najeela will untap, play City of Traitors, using that land to cast Arcane Signet, and then casting Najeela using Tinderwall to get the 2 red to cast her, and then passing the turn to Thrasios Rograkh, who plays a Gaia's Cradle as a land drop, tapping it for 2 mana, and then using the Taiga to cast a Guild Artisan. Command the creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, you create 2 treasure tokens. And then he's using the Bird of Paradise and the last mana floating from Gaia's Cradle to cast his commander. Second, going to combat with Rograkh, it has Menace, so it's hard to block, but then generating 2 treasure tokens because of the Guild Artisan. After that, he's done with his turn, and in the end step, Kambal casts Enlightened Tutor, using it to find a Mox Diamond, putting it on top of his library. On turn, casting Mox Diamond, pitching a Godless Shrine, and then playing a land and Commander Kambal, the Profiteering Major. And then he passes the turn to Kinnan, who plays a Gemstone Caverns as a land drop, and a Basalt Monolith. In response, Rograkh Thrasios is casting Pyroblast on Kinnan, trying to stop the infinite combo. But Kinnan is showing a fierce guardianship protecting himself. Basalt Monolith ultimately resolves, and here he can go infinite by tapping Basalt Monolith and using Basalt Monolith's ability to untap itself, generating infinite mana because every time he activates this ability, he's netting +1 colorless mana. Then casting Energy Refractor that can, for 2 colors that he has infinite of, convert it into any color, so now he has mana of any color. He also gets to draw a card, but here he has infinite Kinnan activations. So he will activate infinitely until he finds Thrasios, and with the infinite mana, activate until he draws into Walking Ballista, cast Walking Ballista, X equals infinite, to deal infinite damage, and win the match. Now that was rather fast, so let's do a game 2. This time around we have Rograkh Thrasios as the starting player, Kambal as second, Najeela as third, and Kinnan as last. Rograkh Thrasios starts off with a fetch land into a turn 1 Mystic Remora. Turn then goes to Kambal, who starts off with a Mox Diamond pitching a fetch land, and then cracking a Verdant Catacombs finding a scrub land, and with his 2 mana he casts a Lofo Corrupted Sheriff. Turn goes to Najeela that plays a fetch land. Najeela cracks the Verdant Catacomb, using it to find a Taiga, and then using that to cast a Delighted Halfling. And with that, turn goes to Kinnan. Kinnan plays a City of Brass and passes the turn. No cards were fed except for the Mox Diamond to the Mystic Remora, but he still pays for it and takes his turn, playing a Gaia's Cradle, and then passing the turn to Kambal, who plays a land, Vault of Champions, and attacks Kinnan with Lofo for 2 damage. Turn goes to Najeela that untaps, plays a Scalding Tarn as a land drop, sacrifice it, but in response, Kambal is casting an Archivist of Ogma, and Najeela is actually quite relieved that it wasn't an opposition agent. So Kambal will gain a life and draw a card, and Najeela will find a Tundra with a Scalding Tarn, and with a free mana available to her, Najeela will come into play. Turn goes to Kinnan, who plays an island and uses that to cast Kinnan, and then casts a Mox Amber, giving a card draw to Mystic Remora as well as triggering Lofo, giving Lofo a treasure. Then casts a Lotus Petal, another card for Mystic Remora, and we've seen this before previously, Basalt Monolith, and once again a card draw for Mystic Remora. However, he's currently cast Kinnan, Mox Amber, Lotus Petal and Basalt Monolith, which means that he has activated the Mind Break Trap. And following up from Kinnan to protect the Basalt Monolith comes a Swan Song. However, a Mana Tithe from the Mono White player. As he gained 2 mana from the Lotus Petal, 2 mana from Mox Amber, he's used 3 to cast Basalt Monolith, and the last 4 to cast Swan Song. He doesn't have 1 remaining mana to pay for Mana Tithe, and Basalt Monolith ends up being counterspelled. Or to be more specific, it actually goes to exile, as the counterspells are protecting Mind Break Trap, and Mind Break Trap will move Basalt Monolith to exile, so he can't regain it from his graveyard anymore. Turn now goes to the Rograkh Thrasios, who decides to sacrifice the Mystic Remora that has already drawn a few cards. He plays a fetch land, sacrificing it, and with his Wooded Foothills he finds Tropical Island, using that to cast a Thrasios. He discards Tesseret the Seeker and the Transmute Artifact and passes the turn to Kambal, who plays a City of Brass, and casts Kambal, Profiteering Major. And then he casts a Mana Vault, triggering Lofo, generating a treasure, and losing a life. Now he's actually gained a few life because of Archivist of Ogma that have triggered on some fetch lands and giving a card draw. But here turn goes to Najeela, who plays a bad land, attacks with Najeela, generating a token, warrior, and everything is going against Thrasios Rograkh. However, when Najeela generates a warrior, so does the Kambal Profiteering Major. And when he generates tokens, everyone loses a life. This is actually a pretty strange anti-tech versus specifically Najeela that is mass producing tokens, which means that Kambal is going to potentially feed from this, and Najeela might accidentally kill herself. A big problem here too is that the tokens that are attacking usually die to blockers. Thrasios is a 1/3, Kinnan is a 2/2, so the Najeela warrior token count will never really climb, while Kambal's token count are climbing. In other words, Najeela might be accidentally king-making Kambal if she keeps attacking like this, as she's never building an army, while she's building an army for Kambal. From here, she passes the turn to Kinnan, who is casting a Sylvan Library using Mox Amber to get the 2 green mana. And then he passes the turn to Rograkh Thrasios, who plays a Flesh Duplicate. Rograkh Thrasios then plays Boseiju Who Endures as a land drop, then casts Basalt Monolith, He's going for the same kind of combo as Kinnan, except that he has Kinnan and Basalt Monolith inside the 99, but Najeela responds with a Fierce Guardianship. But in response to that, Thrasios Rograkh uses the Boseiju to cast a Veil of Summer, trying to protect the Basalt Monolith. Lofo has also triggered and generated a treasure token, as this is the third spell that Rograkh's Thrasios is casting. Najeela then responds in desperation, trying to hope that she can hurt the Kinnan activations with a Brain Freeze on Kinnan. This is also triggering Lofo, as this is Najeela's second spell this turn, giving another treasure for Lofo. This is triggering Kambal, and everyone is losing another life as Kambal is creating another token. The storm count is 4, so there are 5 Brain Freeze targeting Kinnan, and a lot of cards are being milled. One of them being Hullbreaker Horror, and a second one being Trophy Mage, as well as Fairy Mastermind and Otoworo going to the graveyard. And a Relic of Legend is also being milled. Yet this doesn't stop the Basalt combo potential, and he wants to activate it infinitely. But in response to the first untap, Kinnan is responding with a Boseiju who shelters all. Now in theory, Rograkh Thrasios could activate the Basalt Monolith untap ability once more, but he doesn't have the mana to do so. He tapped it, generated 4 and used 3 of those to untap it, having 1 colorless mana remaining, which is not enough to activate it a second time, so Basalt Monolith is killed. Or destroyed, depending on how you wanna express yourself. He's finding a Taiga from the Boseiju Who Endures. An Archivist of Ogma draws yet another card, and goes to Kambal's turn, who plays a land, and a Dark Ritual into a Daffy Voidwalker. Would have been great to have that in play when Rograkh Thrasios were milled. This is the second spell this turn, so Lofo will trigger, generate a treasure, and everyone will lose a life, because Kambal gained a token. He then casts a Ranger Captain of Eos, uses the ETB to search his library for an Esper Sentinel that he's also casting. He then goes to combat with Kambal, hitting Najeela for 2, and then passing the turn to Najeela, who plays a Bloodstain Mire, and then casts a Culling Ritual to basically board wipe almost the entire table. But in response, Kambal is sacrificing Ranger Captain of Eos to silence the board state, so that Najeela can't use any of the black-green mana that is generated from the Culling Ritual. And then close to the entire board state is killed, except for Najeela and Kambal that has a CMC of 3. Now that Archivist of Ogma is gone, Najeela is sacrificing the Bloodstained Mire, finding an Underground Sea. And then, when there are no blockers, she can attack and hit Kambal for 4, generating a token. But still, Kambal also generates a token, and everyone loses a life when the token comes into play under Kambal's board state. Turn goes to Kinnan that plays a Talisman, a mana rock, of the Curiosity variant. And then turn goes to Rograkh Thrasios, who plays a Verdant Catacomb, and then recasts Rograkh paying the commander tax, and then casts a Manglehorn. The only target to destroy is the rock, and Kinnan is crying. Turn goes to Kambal, who plays a Yawgmoth Fran Physician. And now Najeela is crying because Yawgmoth can sacrifice the tokens to give -1 counters on, for example, Najeela. So Najeela can provide tokens for Kambal that can be used into Yawgmoth to draw cards and kill Najeela and kill other commanders. So the Najeela kingmaking Kambal just got worse. Kambal is also attacking at Najeela, and then in post-combat main phase sacrificing the token, giving Najeela -1/-1. Turn goes to Najeela. Now, quite unsure about what Najeela is supposed to do in this situation, she decides to simply just pass turn, as whatever she does, attack, nothing really happens. Kinnan draws a card, plays a land, but then Kinnan doesn't have much to do either, so Kinnan is also just passing the turn. So what we have now is something of a 1v1 versus Rograkh Thrasios and Kambal, while Kinnan Najeela is just sitting idly by and watching and hoping for a development where they can get back into this game somehow. Rograkh Thrasios plays Gemstone Caverns as land drop, using that and 3 other lands to recast Thrasios paying commander tax. Using the Gaia's Cradle to cause an Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing Manglehorn. X of the search is 5 or less. He obviously finds a Seedborn Muse. He has a lot of lands, one being Gaia's Cradle and a Thrasios, so from this point he can be sitting and activating Thrasios with a Seedborn Muse quite often, and as everyone is dead, this is a great opportunity for him to just catch up and get ahead. Or, well, he never was really behind, like part of catching up isn't really a big deal, he's quite already ahead. But let's get more ahead. Turn goes to Kambal, he untaps, and so does Rograkh Thrasios. Kambal casts a Serra Ascendant, a 6/6 flying lifelink for 1 white mana. He goes to combat, hit Najeela for some damage, and then Thrasios activates in the end step, finding a land, putting it into play tapped, and with Gaia's Cradle activates again, finding an Imperial Recruiter that goes to hand. And then turn goes to Najeela, who untaps, and Thrasios also untapped with her. Najeela begins by casting a Dark Ritual, using 1 of the black mana to cast a Culling the Weak, sacrificing the warrior token to gain 4 more black mana. Then casts an Arcane Signet, and using that to cast an Underworld Breach. Obviously, Thrasios is activating in response, finding a Cloud of Fairies that goes to hand, then tapping Cradle for 3 green and 1 more to activate Thrasios a second time, hoping for the best. And he got it. He finds a Fierce Guardianship, and obviously then follows up by casting the Fierce Guardianship on the Underworld Breach, sending it to the graveyard. And now Najeela is absolutely crying. Her plan A failed, no Najeela infinite combat steps, and infinite combo from Underworld Breach failed as well. Turn goes to Kinnan, and Kinnan passes the turn. And in Kinnan's end step, Thrasios is activating, finding a fetch land of the Misty Rainforest variant, activating Thrasios a second time, and finding the One Ring that goes to hand. Thrasios goes to his turn. He begins by casting the Imperial Recruiter. In response, Kambal, or specifically Yawgmoth, is sacrificing a Serra Ascendant to give Rograkh -1/-1, killing Rograkh. As Kambal and the entire table is a little bit uncertain about what they are going to do, or well, how Thrasios and Rograkh is actually going to win, this is just in safety measures. And Imperial Recruiter is finding Eternal Witness. What he actually wanted to find was Trophy Mage, and with Trophy Mage he can find Cloudstone Courier. There is just a problem. Trophy Mage is in the graveyard. It was milled with the Brain Freeze, if you remembered earlier. Kinda cool how that actually had an impact later in the game. But Eternal Witness is a good solution for this. The question is, does he have the mana for all of this? Step 1. Sticker Goblin. Sticker Goblin generates 4 red mana, but being a creature it also increases Gaia's Cradle's potential, making it tap for a total of 4 green, and then casting Eternal Witness, getting the Trophy Mage from graveyard back into hand. Then casting Cloud of Fairies, On ETB, this will untap 2 lands, so he will untap a land that taps for blue and then Gaia's Cradle. And now currently he has 6 creatures in play, making Cradle tap for 6 green. With that he can cast the Trophy Mage, searching his library, finding Cloudstone Curio, casting the Cloudstone Curio. In response, Yawgmoth is sacrificing the commander Kambal to kill the Cloud of Fairies, and then casting a March of Outwardly Light, trying to get rid of the Sticker Goblin. Rograkh Thrasios plays a land for turn, Steam Vents, shocking it into play, then casts the Cloudstone Curio, pays 2 life and casts a Phyrexian Metamorph, making it come into play as a copy of Eternal Witness, and with the Eternal Witness ETB, returning Cloud of Fairies from the graveyard to hand, recasting Cloud of Fairies using Steam Vent, triggering Cloudstone Curio, and ETB untapping Cradle, and another land that taps for blue, returning Eternal Witness back to his hand with the Cloudstone Curio trigger, recasting Eternal Witness, returning Cloud of Fairies, and here he has a loop. As Cloud of Fairies will always untap a blue source and Cradle, he can use that to recast Eternal Witness and Cloud of Fairies infinitely, and basically recast anything from his graveyard infinitely. He can also just activate Thrasios infinitely, find Final of Devastation, he hasn't gone to combat yet, and give everything haste and infinite, and attack for lethal. Good game, Thrasios Rograkh wins. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this battle match. Who knows, we might be making more narrated gameplays in the future, but our hopes are to be able to record with perfect audio when we're able to. In any case, take care guys, and we'll see you in the next one.